Let's talk about tent stakes. Hey everybody, welcome back. Chris with Hikes. If you're new here, this is a channel for beginner backpackers. And today we're going to talk about tent stakes, which, you know, a lot of people don't give a lot of thought to. And just starting out, you just figure they come with your tent, you stick them in the ground, you're good to go, right? Essentially, that's true. But there's some nuances, there's some different types of stakes, and different stakes are made for different conditions. And so today we're going to take a look at some of those and talk a little bit about alternatives and workarounds when you run into a little bit of trouble. So in the introduction, setting up a tent and ran into a little bit of hard ground there. So, and the result of that was this. So, how do we avoid that? So, in that particular instance, the hard ground bent the stake because I was trying to force it through something that gave more resistance than it could handle. And so, the stake bent. So, this tent stake came with my Hyke and Byke tent. And I did find over the years, these are, you know, they're all right. They've got some resistance. They have a little angle to them. And so that's nice, but they are easy to bend. And so after some time of running into issues like that with hard ground, I bought some other stakes. But let's talk about these for now. So trying to put this in the ground, not a big deal. And these actually come with a push tool, little disc to save on your hands. You can also use a rock if you're having a hard time getting those in. You can even push them down with your boot, but if you get a lot of resistance, it tends to hurt your foot and still bend the tent stake. So in this case, I used a rock and just basically kind of overdid that just to show you what can happen. All right, so this can happen to you. Few ways to avoid that. So if you can't get your stake into the ground because it's rocky or there's a rock or a giant tree root there, sometimes you can just try moving it half an inch this way, half an inch that way, and get it in. Sometimes you might have to move your whole tent. But as you saw, you can also just tie a guy line and try anchoring it out a little further. But if all of the soil is rocky like that, that can be a problem. And you might need to have a different type of tent stake. Because different tent stakes are made for different things. And eventually I used this guy, which is essentially a giant nail that this thing is never going to bend. But they're pretty heavy. So typically we're going to use, you know, these lighter tent stakes if we're backpacking and don't want to carry a whole ton of weight. These are pretty heavy duty. They'll go through a lot of stuff. And you can pick these up just about anywhere if you want to try these. But just as easily could have tied it out to a spot that Now, if you're on super rocky ground or just straight rock, what do you do if you can't stake out your tent? Well, in that case, sometimes you don't need to. If you have a freestanding tent with tent poles like this one, it's going to stand up without those tent stakes. But, you know, if it's really windy or whatever, you might not want it to blow away. And you're going to have some weight inside of that tent with your sleeping bag and pad and your gear. But, you know, still it's going to be hard to withstand wind and stay nice and tight. And you might need to stake out your guy lines as well. And if you can't do that at all because of rocky soil, what do? You can use rocks. In this instance, there was no heavy rocks there. But if you tie line to a rock, small rock, pull it out, put a big rock on that line. So if it tries to pull back in, that little rock's coming up against the big rock. That's gonna keep you all tied up. I personally have put big rocks inside my tent in the corners when there was no getting tent stakes in the ground. It was super windy and I didn't have any guy line because I didn't think that I would need it. So that actually works. Takes up a little space. Be careful not to tear up your floor, but you can do that. But generally you're going to be able to get a stake in the ground, but you might need different types of stakes. So in this case, the Kelty came with these nice sturdy hooked stakes. These are called shepherd hooks. And one of the things we run into with these is that you need to get it all the way down into the ground so that this part is anchoring. So here I have a similar stake. You can pick these up almost anywhere. And if you have a fairly inexpensive tent, these are usually what it's going to come with. So again, these work fine, but if you don't get them all the way down, this generally will turn and it'll slip off. So when you stake these in, you want to get this all the way down to where it is anchored like that. And these will work fairly fine in fairly firm soil. Now, because those pull so easily and twist so easily, I personally have switched to more of a Y-shaped tent stake. And you can get different sizes. So these fairly inexpensive. You can get these at Walmart and they are Y-shaped. And so they offer some pretty good resistance on all sides. And this one has a little line here. You can tie that out as well. So these are not going to twist so much. And even if they do, they're pretty much symmetrical all the way around. Little notches here. I like these a lot, but since I'm weight conscious, I go with the same thing, but in a smaller size. But not always. So these are obviously going to be fairly shallow, but they're definitely light. These are called Mini Groundhogs from MSR, and I really love these, but they're not optimal for everything. When I was on the Timberline Trail, one of the camp spots I found had very sandy soil. I could not keep these in because I didn't have a freestanding tent and my tent required tension, so these kept slipping. I had a really hard time with these, and I would have done a lot better with something with a lot more surface area, possibly something like this. This is huge, and it's not going to work in rocky ground. It's not going to work very well on hard ground, but in sandy soil, this guy's going to work pretty well. Typically they use these for like awnings and big tarps, things like that. But this would work if you were, say, camping along the beaches. This might be helpful. Now, what do you do if you're in total loose sand? This is still going to pull out, most likely. And if you're in snow, same deal. Snow is super soft. So there are tent stakes made for snow, and they look like this. These have a lot of surface area. They've got these little holes in them, and that's going to give you resistance. And you can put these in like this and tie them off here if you need to, or if you like, you can dig down and do what's called a dead man anchor. Tie it in the middle, bury this down, cover it up. That's going to freeze in there, and that's going to give you all kinds of resistance, and this is not going to pull out easily. So that works really well in loose sand as well. And if you're really worried about it, these snow stakes are enormous, and this is going to do the same thing for you. And this is going to be pretty useless in regular soil, but sand, snow, these are going to work pretty well for you. So do you need to go out and buy different tent stakes after you buy your first tent? No, you don't. I wouldn't even recommend it. Use what you got, check them out, get used to them. And if they don't work for you, then you can look around. As you see, we've got lots of other options. But yeah, there's definitely some techniques with those shepherd hooks. Just make sure you get them all the way down into the ground so they don't twist on you. And then if you can't get a stake into hard ground, you know, sometimes if you've got 3 down, that's fine. I'll let one go. And again, if you got a heavy duty stake like this, you may be able to drive this down in there. But if not, you can tie it out further to a softer area and use the stake you have. You can even tie it off on a tree, branch, rocks, things like that. This is just kind of a starter video. We can look at some of those techniques in more detail in the future, but yeah, since this is for beginners, that's something we tend to overlook is tent stakes. We figure out how to set up our tent, and then we just figure we're going to put stakes in the ground. But you're going to have guy lines, possibly, whether you want to use those or not, depending on the weather. And obviously, if you can't get stakes in the ground, your tent could possibly blow away while you're out walking around, if you're in a hurricane, something like that. So anyway, that's all I got for you guys today, but I'll leave a link to some of these stakes if you're interested in trying something new. And if you have any questions, just leave them below. And for those of you who are fairly experienced with these things, leave comments below. I'm finding lately that some of the best information that comes out of these videos is in the comments. So check that out, and I'll see you next time.